Hey, thanks. Yeah, and thanks everybody for taking time out of the day to join me. Yeah, as you said, my name is Dan DeCloss, and just want to talk to you a little bit about my experience, over the last 15 years, and hopefully shed some light on some things that I've learned throughout my career as not only going through each of the trenches. So I've been a red teamer, a blue teamer, and then been in leadership and now a founder as well. So it was fun to catch the tail end of Bryson's talk because he's speaking a lot of things that I've had to live through recently as well. So what I love about the community is that we can all collaborate and come together. So hopefully you find some value here in today's talk. Brief agenda for what I want to kind of cover today is like, what is the problem that we're going to try and solve as an industry? What are we truly here for? We're a fairly young industry from the cybersecurity perspective. What are the common duties that both red team and blue teamers have within an organization? And we'll kind of describe a little bit of the differences and nuances that people have for those terms. And then the things that actually end up happening in real life. And I realized as I was putting this deck together that definitely it's coming at it from like my experiences when I was a practitioner, on boots on the ground, so to speak, and then continuing to move up into leadership, and just my perspective on what leadership is actually looking for and what we're actually trying to accomplish, versus the practitioner that is in the trenches doing the daily work. And so bridging those gaps to be able to actually show like, hey, what are the things that we should actually be measuring and providing metrics and growth on? And then how do we actually accomplish those? How do we actually measure these things to show that we're making progress in our security posture, or helping our customers, if we're in the consulting side, helping our customers get better in security, and how are we actually moving the needle for everybody? So that's kind of generally what I want to talk about today. Really appreciate your time. For those of you that don't know me, which is probably a lot, I am like I said, I've been in the industry for about 15 years, a little over 15 years. I got into security the most formal way possible. I have 2 degrees in computer science. I went to the Naval Postgraduate School for my master's degree and specifically studied information security. Had the privilege of rubbing shoulders with some really, really smart people, and just that's where I fell in love with security and started my career that way. I do have several certifications, and I don't tend to highlight those too often, but beyond, some of the ones that people are, would recognize a little bit more. So I do have my OSCP and then the CISSP. So I value knowledge and gaining knowledge, and then the application of those skills more than the acronyms, that come with that, the education and whatnot. But overall, I started my career in the DoD, doing government security work, penetration testing, vulnerability assessment, a lot of CNA work, which sometimes is fun, sometimes not. And then went into government contracting, consulting. So I was a pen tester on the Veracode pen testing team. I was a principal there. Moved on to Mayo Clinic, got to do some fun stuff there, hacking medical devices, things like that. Helped out with the Anthem application security team. Built out as a security director, a blue team here at a local company called Sensi. And then now I'm the founder of PlexTrack. Over that span of career, though, I've dabbled. I would say I'm a chief tinkerer, like I say here, but I've done a lot of pen testing. I love the truest sense of the word hacking, being able to try and find bugs, solving those puzzles, and then doing a lot of vulnerability management and security assessments. And then, have continued to be entrepreneurial in that regard. I was a 1099 contractor, started working on the side a little bit, and then started building out PlexTrack as a side hustle, and eventually, launched it as a company. So the point of this is just to mainly show like I have a lot of experience, and so that's where I'm drawing this from. But appreciate you taking some time to just kind of listen to what I have to say. And by no means do I consider myself the authoritative voice on security metrics and security work that's actually getting done. Just some observations, and so I love feedback, would love to answer any questions, or even just get some other tips from people that they're finding how to get work done in their daily work. So. But if there were 2 things that I would hope you can take away from this talk today is like what activities within the cybersecurity program, both on the red and blue team, actually move the needle. So actually improving the security posture, and then what are we measuring to ensure that number 1 takes place, right? So those are the 2 key takeaways that I hope we can accomplish today. So first off, I always like to, and this was based on a mentor of mine that really helped hone every time we come into a decision that we have to make, whether we're a company or a security team or just individuals. Before you start diving in to spend money or time and resources on things, you really should just take it one quick step and say, what problem are we actually trying to solve? You know, what is the problem at hand that we need to solve, and what factors go into this decision? From the security perspective, we're all trying to make the world safer in general, right? I would assume that's kind of why we're all in security as a whole. But like for specific decisions regarding your security program or building out your consulting practice or your company or whatnot, you know, just kind of take a step back of like, does this decision, does attending this conference, webinar, product, buying a product, those kinds of things, does it move us closer to that goal of achieving safer overall cybersecurity posture? And is this a priority? And when we're talking about products or solutions, is this a build versus buy scenario? What are the total cost of ownerships of these things? And how long does it take to implement something like this, whether it's a process or a policy or even a product, a tool for our consulting practice or for our company or security team? You know, what kind of return on investment? So what are the things that we should be considering when trying to solve the specific problem? One thing I've noticed throughout my time in the space is that we as tinkerers and hackers love to dive into things and then not realize how much time we're actually spending on fixing the problem, or actually spending way too much time tinkering as opposed to actually getting us closer to moving the needle. So there's some of the things I want to talk about today as well. In regards to ascribed duties from both the red and blue teams, kind of like level setting of like what everybody would expect, and I'm sure this is kind of news, or not news to many of you, but just to kind of level set on like what people might consider the red activities and duties of the red team versus the duties of the blue team. I would consider a red team, there's obviously people that are the very, very technical red team types, and people will ascribe red teaming to very specific activities. I kind of abstract that a little bit, particularly that as I've grown to be more into leadership and management, being able to have the red and the blue concepts at the leadership level definitely helps when talking about the different activities that go on from an overall security program. So I don't intend to offend people that are more technical red teamers, but I definitely consider like the red activities to be the offensive or the proactive steps in any kind of security program. The ones that are ascribed to finding the gaps in the security posture. So that could be through a penetration test, a black box assessment, a web app pen test, even security assessments based on like risk frameworks and those kinds of things. I kind of abstract it to mean all of those things. But definitely it's associated with writing exploits, automating attacks, simulating those attack life cycles, and attesting to security controls. So you're actually there to try and show how good or bad a program is defending against these attacks. On the blue side, it's being much more defensive, and that's by nature. There's so many things coming at the blue team from various sources that their true mission is to try and defend against these attacks and secure the holes that might get found, but also monitoring security configurations, building and implementing security policy, training organizations and training team members throughout the organization is a big one, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Scanning for vulnerabilities or just general awareness of security issues. And this also is in tandem, playing a collaborative part with those red teams and the folks doing the more proactive assessments, and then obviously responding to alerts and incidents. So these are kind of like just a level set of like, this is generally what I've experienced as these are the typical duties that take place when you're on a red team versus a blue team. And my experience building out a blue team is that you get overwhelmed with a lot of different aspects of things to figure out. And then on the red team, you start to get very inundated with lots of different tasks that you get nervous about actually having the capabilities to accomplish, and really trying to have to collaborate with your other team members to make sure that you have the skill set and the knowledge to be able to appropriately assess the security posture. So there's definitely, I would say, some imposter syndromes from both sides of the fence, right? From my opinion, here's what I would say is what winning looks like as I've grown in my career, being both a pen tester and building on a blue team and being on blue teams. There's nothing more satisfying, I think, as a red teamer than actually, conducting a deep exploit where you had to identify a very intricate problem within the security posture of a product or a network, and writing the exploit to actually make it work and getting that shell or getting access to a database. There's probably nothing more satisfying than that from the red team's perspective, at least in my opinion, right? On the blue team, I think seeing that some of the training that you actually conduct within the organization actually pays off. And I know that's kind of like interesting number one, but when we talk about the security posture from the blue team, this is where security work gets done, and some of the important security work is actually being able to educate the people in your environment, adapting to the culture to where the culture actually starts saying, hey, we need to take security seriously and be able to report things when they come up, unbeknownst to the security team. So that's definitely like a rewarding thing that I've experienced in my career, and I think that's probably one of the biggest aspects to what security winning looks like. On the red team, when you're actually seeing visible enhancement based on the work that you've done. So when you're coming in year over year and you're saying, hey, last year, we exploited these XYZ things, and then this year they're not there. And even though they could potentially be there, right? So it's not a completely new product or a completely new network. It's just that the things that you found, from the previous assessment actually don't exist today in that environment. So that to me is a very rewarding thing, and what I consider, where that work from the security perspective is getting done, where you actually show year over year or assessment over assessment that the work that you're identifying needs to get done is actually getting done. On the blue team side, I mentioned tabletops because my experience, I wouldn't have normally said this before, but when we were building out a blue team, the tabletop exercises were probably one of the most valuable things that our team could have done. We took them at a calculated level where we would bring in actual people like the director of risk and the legal department and the HR department. And we would do tabletop exercises where we would walk through simulated attacks or simulated scenarios that really test our incident response planning policies, our procedures, how we would be able to identify certain things in logs and audit trails. And this also provided an awareness to the other stakeholders within the environment, that organization, that this is what we actually have to do on a daily basis. These are the things that are actually on the tops of our minds. And so it really gave credibility to the work that we were doing and helped get that stakeholder buy-in. So I found tabletops to be very valuable as we were building out our blue team and growing the program and getting the evangelism out there in a way that's like, oh, this makes sense as to like what you're actually responsible for doing. One of the things that I love doing as well is malware reversing. I can't say that I've done a lot of it recently, but this is also very, I think, rewarding, and I think that's important work in the security field from the red team perspective, being proactive about what are the tactics and techniques that attackers are using in the wild today. This is what helps move the needle, and I think it's a very rewarding thing when you actually start to be able to identify this is a piece of malware that you can actually reverse engineer and identify some of the tactics and techniques that these actors are using, so that you can actually provide that feedback to your, if you're a consulting firm, and you can provide that feedback to your customers, like, hey, keep an eye out for this, or provide this to the community from an IOC perspective. So I think this is very valuable work. Getting senior management support on the blue team is very important, and like I said, it kind of ties in with those tabletops from my perspective. But having the support from the top is an important aspect to building out any blue team. When I first got started in security, it was in the Department of Defense, and security at the time was not like a well-known, or like there was not a lot of jobs in security outside of like the government and some of the bigger companies like financial firms and things like that. And you always kind of felt like you're having this battle against senior management to invest in security, even in the Department of Defense, and even in certain agencies, even though like there were certain restrictions and directives from the Secretary of Defense to do these kinds of things, it was still always a battle. So getting the senior management buy-in is always a valuable piece of security, especially from the blue teams, and it's definitely a part of making that needle move better towards a better security posture. I also think that from the red team perspective, doing an intense amount of knowledge sharing is important. Being able to share with not only your stakeholders, but the blue teams, everybody that's involved in the security program, being able to share that knowledge. Here's how we wrote the exploit. Here's what we did to solve it. Everybody is constrained with budget, skill set, resources, those kinds of things. So the more knowledge that you can share as a red team, the better. And this is where security work actually happens, in my opinion, to the fact that not only can you identify the holes and be able to exploit them, but you can also communicate them effectively to the people that need to fix them. And also seeing junior team members grow, right? I think there's definitely in my career, it's not like I find it very rewarding where I've been able to help junior pen testers and junior security engineers grow, and we're all in the same boat in terms of trying to move the security needle, address the security needs within the industry, and we all know we need more talent, right? And it's not a matter of just having more people doing the work, it's actually having people that know how to do the work, and that's what's one of the biggest challenges that we face. And so having the ability to not only share that knowledge from the red team, but see the junior team members grow and become leaders within your consulting firm or your internal red team is very rewarding, and this is an important piece of winning.
Dan, I want to present you with a question we got in Discord. It was, who is responsible for fixing issues found by red team? Should the red team be involved in fixing those issues? And what kind? And I want to add on to that a little bit myself, because I red team. What amount of involvement would you recommend for a red teamer to take in those fixes?
Yeah, and I think that also depends on like what the relationship actually is from the red team. I mean, if we're talking about like an external consulting firm, then most likely the red team is not going to be as involved in fixing the issues unless it's part of the contract, right? And but like for the internal team, I definitely think that they should be at least helping with the blue team on like identifying what fixes would work, right? And that's and to me, that's what that purple teaming concept actually is, where you're truly collaborating on here's what we think should work, here's these techniques, and the blue team is helping fix them. But the red team is definitely involved every step of the way. So there's like iterative collaboration on the fixes to make sure that they actually get resolved. Does that help?
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I think that was really helpful.
Yeah. Oops. So, and then I think on the blue team, as much as we, at least from a techie guy, I don't want to insult anybody and say that I would say a lot of people don't like writing policy. There are some that I've met that enjoy writing policy, and it's not very fun. But I think what is important is seeing effective policy. So one of the examples that I would bring is there's simple technical things that need to get done to drastically improve security posture, like removal of local administrative privileges from an organization, right? It seems like a no-brainer, but being able to actually implement a policy in an organization to do that when they're used to having those privileges is very challenging. And so winning from the blue team perspective is being able to show and communicate why that needs to happen and being able to implement that policy. And so that's an important piece of the puzzle from what I would say where everybody has responsibility from both red and blue to build those relationships, build the relationships with the people early, so that the ones that are going to actually help you enforce these decisions and enforce these policies, as well as building the relationships across everybody that you come in contact with. Building your network in this industry is important, and being able to know who to talk to when you're stuck is very valuable. And so I think that an important part of winning in security is continuing to build the network and and not only taking it upon yourself to try and ask questions of people, but also being willing to answer them, right? So taking a sense of humility and know that we're all in this together, trying to improve the security posture for everybody. And that flows into true collaboration, kind of what I was sharing, regarding like the fixes, right? So definitely I experienced, and I'm even guilty of this myself, where I would find an exploit, and I would have killer way to write the code to exploit it, pop a database or whatever, and dish that over to the recipients and be done with it. Like, yep, good luck. It's your I found it. You got to fix it. And that's not true collaboration, and that's not really what winning looks like in today's era, or maybe ever truly. But truly being able to collaborate and say like, hey, not only can we help find it, but we're going to help you fix it, and we're going to provide good recommendations, and we're going to learn as well. Because I think that we start to get siloed in this concept of the red and the blue, where the blue is, undoubtedly, the blue team is typically looking up to the red team, right? I think one thing I've noticed as a trend in our industry is that the red teamers are revered, right? And rightfully so. I mean, they're very talented people and do some really fun, cool stuff. But the blue team is also worthy of being revered. I've met some amazing people that can automate and do some very fantastic things regarding like script log analysis and being able to automate activities for response, and truly improving ways to get things done on the blue team side. So having both of those types of people collaborate together to be able to say to the security director or the leadership that this is how, this is where that investment is actually paying off. And I mentioned it a little bit before as well, but automation, both teams need to automate as much as they can. Coming back to that, shortage of skill set, shortage of talent, being able to use your skill set for the things that really take more intricate work means you got to get as much off of your plate as possible. And I know we always hammer on automation, but it is really important. And regarding automation, it's important to be able to say, these are the things that I can do versus I should go buy something to go help me with it. And that kind of comes back to that, what problem are we trying to solve and what's the best approach and the total cost of ownership. I think one thing that gets lost in a lot of the discussion around what winning looks like is how much your time is actually worth. I think that it's easy to get sucked into just trying to write a script for the fun of it to make it work, and not realizing that you've just potentially wasted a lot of time that you could have been spending on finding that next bug or patching that next hole. So having the balance of time management and knowing and having a better perspective of what your time is actually worth, not only to your organization but to your team, is an important thing to always keep in the back of your mind. Like, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try and get this to work, from my own perspective for this script, for XYZ amount of time, and then I'm going to say like, okay, it's going to take this much more time. We should either table this or go find a better way to do it. So this is just some observations of my perspective of what I think winning looks like in the security field, based on growing through the red team and the blue team, and then seeing what I feel works from a purple team collaboration perspective. And that's why I say like purple team, in my opinion, is the bringing together of all the different resources from the both proactive and reactive. I know purple teaming has different context, and that just to kind of level set, that's what my context is from this discussion. To highlight some of the soul suckers for those of you that haven't lived through these, this is probably more of a slide to help highlight to management or leadership like what actually happens that can divert and distract from getting the actual security work done. I think there's nothing more discouraging from a red team's perspective than finding the same thing over and over again in the same environment. Whether that's a network pen test where they still don't have laps enabled or something like that, or like they still haven't parameterized queries on their web database with the same exact inputs, right? So clearly they didn't do anything between the time we came in before and the time we came in today, and I can attest that I've encountered multiple times on pen tests. Again, my focus was more on AppSec pen testing, but coming in and having done the same test a year ago, finding the same vulnerability, and it's just like, well, shoot. I mean, like, do I just resubmit the same report? And obviously, from a tester's perspective, you don't do that, but that is kind of a soul-sucking, approach. I think on the blue team side, we definitely all get tired of vendor spiels. Vendors are important. But I say this as now I'm a vendor myself, but respecting people's time, like I came before, and knowing like, hey, I don't need to be sitting in on this vendor. And from a leadership perspective, being aware of where your blue team members should be spending their time and not having them involved in vendor demos and things like that until it's actually necessary, until you actually need their feedback, until you need their input on, is this a solution that we need to be looking at? And so there's nothing more soul-sucking to me as a blue team practitioner than having to go sit in another demo of a product that I don't want to buy, than actually getting some more work done on the daily tasks. Red teamers do have a lot of administrative overhead in my experience. So trying to limit that, I think, is important, whether that's, unnecessary calls with customers or, going back and forth with junior engineers on how to reproduce issues and things like that. So always just being mindful of, again, kind of where your time is being spent, but there is a lot of soul suckingness going on within the administrative overhead, both in the red team, like I think more from the consulting side as well, just having to get on customer calls a lot, and not that those aren't important, but balancing, what calls your technical resources need to actually be on.
Hey Dan, we got another question here, but I kind of want to make a comment to what you just said.
Yeah.
For internal, so I've done external and internal, but I'm doing a lot of internal red teaming, and for me, there's that soul-sucking feeling when you can't get everything fixed that quick, right? We all in security, we're so worried about breaches, but when you work internally as a red teamer, I feel like that's stress, or that it sucks your soul out. I mean, not really, but it's stressful where you're working and you're finding so many things so fast, but you can't get it fixed that quick. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it's, it's like, the problem is there, and then it keeps you up at night because you don't know how long it's going to take to get resolved. I feel you.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we have a question here. You mentioned a solid list of ascribed duties for the blue and red teams. As a fairly new blue teamer, what would you say are the best things to focus on from the start? I find myself digging into and attempting to learn everything possible, but feel I should focus in some way.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. I mean, as you can see, like, I tinkered with a lot of stuff, and I still do. I did forensics, I did pen testing, I did a lot of technical things. So I think it's okay. I think you give yourself some grace in terms of like, what do I, because you're going to find something that's going to be more of your passion, and you're going to kind of start to dig into a specialty at some point. And so it's okay to like say like, hey, I want to dig into this. I think early on, if you're just trying to build out a blue team, focusing on some of the more tried and true things within our industry. So like vulnerability management is something that is very, it's been around for a long time, and there's a lot of good practices that you can learn there, and it's still not done very well. So I mean, if there was one thing I would just say, like, just go start to try to do that better, would be vulnerability management. And if you don't end up liking vulnerability management, then start to look into the other aspects of blue teaming. Because you may find that you like doing log analysis and SOC, more like secure operations work, than the vulnerability management side of the house. But I think like every blue team is going to need a solid full management program, a way to identify security issues from an alerting perspective. So being able to analyze logs in some capacity. I mean, those are the two places I would just my visceral reaction would be.
Awesome. We do have another question in the GoToWebinar. Do feelings get hurt? How do you build relationships to get the collaboration done? I'm assuming this is around the patching and getting all that work done.
That's actually a good question. I'm going to make a note about feelings, and I talk a little bit about later about collaboration, but one thing that the red team can definitely do is they can definitely be pretty discourteous to the blue teamers, and they can come off as arrogant and things like that. And basically, at the end of the day, the red team needs to realize that you're calling somebody's baby ugly, right? And you got to be able to do that in the most tactful way, so that they don't shut you off and then just not take you and not want to do anything that you're actually telling them to do. So there is an important piece of tact that comes from the red team side. And then from the blue team side, you are trying to reach out to your IT administrators, to your developers. And so being able to communicate this effectively is the most important thing. So yeah, you can hurt feelings, and I've done it before too. And then you realize that you're not going to be effective the next time you go to try and work with that person or that group. And so always being tactful about, and as much as I hate to say it, there's every organization is going to have some politics, right? And so understanding the culture, understanding who the right people, who the influencers are, maybe not the leader, like the influencers may not be the boss, right? And so having a good understanding of the environment that you live in really helps in addressing those feelings and how you can approach tactfully to solve these problems. Cool. Okay, I'll move on. So another soul sucker for me was always like, you bought a tool and you want it to be working the way that you want it to, and you spend more time troubleshooting the tool and trying to keep it stable and up than it's actually providing any value back to you. So this is a very soul-sucking thing. Again, it comes back to like, what is the total cost of ownership of these things before you buy them? So I think it's important to keep that in mind, that this, as you buy new things and you get all these new flashy lights, that there's overhead that comes with each of these tools. And so making sure that you're solving the right problems with these purchases, or even building them out, especially like on the like open source thing. Like open source tools are great, but sometimes you end up troubleshooting them a lot more and spending a lot more time and money, troubleshooting those than getting a fully supported product. Policy reviews where you're consistently having to review policy is also a soul sucker. Again, some people like it. My opinion on policy is that it should mimic the processes that you have in place and be somewhat aspirational, but not entirely aspirational. So you should be reviewing these as they apply to your daily life, and not just a document that says you do one thing and then reality reflects something different. So start with the program building first, and then have reality be reflected in your policy. And don't review it so often that you end up spending more time just having people read documents and make nefarious comments. Soul-sucking things too are like when I worked for a company where we had to respond to a lot of vendor and third-party questionnaires. There's nothing more discouraging than having to answer the same question over and over and over again. So develop a good process around this, and there are some good products out there that do this, but just having your repository of questions you're going to get asked really saves time from having to go back to the same person and answer those questions again. On the red team side, this is definitely my experience. I think I would say I haven't done as much network pen testing, but AppSec pen testing, there's nothing more discouraging than getting ready for a test. You're excited about doing it, and then you realize that you don't have the access that you need. The scoping questionnaire wasn't filled out properly. You don't have access to the environment or the accounts, or like you want to be able to expose more things and have just been restricted. And so that starts to kind of demoralize the red team. And that kind of plays into scoping limitations as well. So understanding that I'm only supposed to be testing this piece, or maybe like take a PCI test, for example, where they've scoped out the cardholder data environment to be just these systems, but that that's not really reflective of what can actually access that. And so there's nothing more soul-sucking than that. And I think that's an important lesson for both the red team and the blue team is to truly set the scope appropriately. And I'm always a fan of broader scope than more narrow, because you give everybody more creativity and more flexibility in that fashion. Metrics reporting, where you have to add a lot of metrics from a lot of different sources, can get very tedious and very time consuming. I experienced this as a director where I had 50 different tools, let's just say that, and needed to combine these metrics and try to actually get an accurate picture of where we were going. And so developing good metrics early on is important. We're going to talk about metrics here in a sec. And alert fatigue, and this is probably the biggest soul sucker, from just the daily work on a blue team side. is that you come in and you've got your SIM, or you've got these different tools that are providing you the information, but they're providing so much information that it's actually just more noise and not much signal. And so being able to have the courage to start small and branch out rather than collecting the whole world and coming in. And so my advice for anybody that's building on a blue team is don't get your blue team overwhelmed with alerts early on. Start with the highest critical things that you could possibly alert on, and only those, and then branch out from there. And then definitely a soul sucker on the red team is like, you get to the end of the engagement, you're trying to write the report, and you're spending more time formatting the stupid document than actually getting it delivered and moving on, getting distractions with like constant reviews of reports and stuff. And that's the part that I think a lot of people maybe don't talk about when they're talking about red teaming, but reporting is an important part of that process. And so finding ways to streamline your reporting process are important. From a purple team perspective, there's nothing more soul sucking for everybody than meetings and more meetings, right? So be purposeful about your meetings. Drive-bys can be soul sucking if it's the same person. So have the courage to just say like, hey, we need to schedule some time. Now is not a good time. And I'm coming at this more from the perspective of these are the things that actually get distracting, because both red and blue teamers, all technologists, need time to dig in, right? And so if you're trying to find a vulnerability in an application, you can't do that in hour chunks at a time, right? It takes blocks of time to be able to do that. Same with digging into log analysis, right? On the blue team, like you're gonna have this audit trail that you're gonna be tracing, and your mind is focused on that, and it's important to stay focused on that through that process. And when you get interrupted, multiple times a day, it starts to suck you dry. And I think what's most important is just having bad process. If you don't have good process on all of these things, this is where you start to lose your focus. And so these are things that really start to suck people dry, and start to wear people out, right? I mean, we do talk in the industry about getting burnt out with insecurity, and it, unfortunately, it comes down to some aspects of just bad planning and bad process. So how do we move the needle then? What is, we've talked about what winning looks like. We've talked about the soul sucking aspects, and this is my very rudimentary approach to, to continuing to move this needle based on what I've experienced in my career. And hopefully, there's people that can also provide good feedback as well. But on the red team side, having good planning going into an engagement. Here's what we're going to execute. Here's the approach we're going to take, and here's why we're going to do that. Developing effective methodologies that are repeatable, right? So it's important to be able to give people creativity when they're conducting a red team exercise, because every engagement is going to be different, and they need the flexibility to dive deeper into one area than in this engagement than they might not have in the other one. But still having an effective methodology to where it's like you can confidently say that we covered these things. And being efficient with your exploitation and discovery. It's easy to get sucked into this. I know I can pop this SQL injection, or I know I can get Privesc on this box, and taking too much time to actually say like, okay, I've got to stop and move on. So understanding the criteria for how deep to go, how much time to spend on finding these vulnerabilities versus it's that depth versus breadth dilemma. So just having some guidelines within your team are important. Like, hey, if you're starting to spend 4 hours and you haven't really got anywhere, take a step back, right, and move on to these other pieces of the engagement. From the blue team perspective, effective patching, as I mean, I think I've been saying this for 15 years, right? I think everybody knows like you got to have effective patch management, and the way to do that is to truly collaborate with the right people and have good processes in place that we talk about in kind of the overall purple team aspects, but building policy out of process, like I mentioned before. Prescribing duties each week I found to be very valuable because like blue teamers do tend to start to kind of just navigate and gravitate towards the things that they're comfortable with. And this is the same with red team as well, but I think, I noticed it a lot on the blue team is like, I just want to stick in my little pigeonhole of doing this XYZ thing. And so then that's okay. But I think what worked effectively for me is like, okay, for this week though, you're going to be focused on this, and I want you to learn something new, and I want you to come back with an activity that we can use as a team to really move this needle, and then you can go back to doing this other activity. So that way you're keeping people engaged, and you're keeping people rotating around. And I think one other important aspect from the blue team perspective is to have a proactive mindset. It's easy to get caught into the defensive and reactive mentality. But when you're saying more proactively, like, what are the ways that somebody could break into our network? What are the ways that I could bypass these controls? You start thinking about ways then to protect against those, and that's the whole point of kind of the purple teaming mentality. Excellent communication is important for across the board. It helps in overcoming those cultural barriers, like we mentioned before, about if you're hurting people's feelings, how do you tactfully tell somebody that, hey, this is a problem you caused. How do you improve on it? I mean, how do you help them get better, right? So it takes some humility. It takes being approachable. And I think, being able to say like, hey, we're in this together, and sharing our knowledge to improve everybody's well-being. I also think that from just in that regards, the security team should be a friendly face, right? Getting in front of the people in your organization face to face is important. Some of you may not be able to do that remotely, but at least being able to say like, I'm a friendly face, I'm not going to always come with a problem. I'm going to come with some solutions. I'm going to help as well. And even just being nice to people when you don't have anything to share with them, it goes a long way. And then people are more they're more willing to approach you when they notice something that's wrong, or when you do actually come to them and say like, hey, I've recognized this, and we need to like figure out a way to solve this problem together. The proper metrics really help in like, what are we measuring correctly? Things like, mean time to remediation is a good one that I'll talk about here in a second. Good processes and procedures. That's the boring stuff, but it's important. And as you move to a more mature organization, both on the red and blue, having those processes in place really actually do help save time to be able to focus on the fun things. Killing cynicism, and nipping that in the bud. It's easy, and again, I'm guilty of it myself, of being cynical, thinking these people are never going to learn, they're never going to get it. These people are never going to listen. I hate talking to these people. Those kinds of things become cancerous, and they start to, just weaken everybody's morality, or sorry, morals. Morale. There you go. Or morality. I don't know. But anyway, so like killing that cynicism and not being negative, trying to stay positive, and that's not easy. But if we all work together, it's we can all say like, hey, there's hope, right? There's things that we can do to make things better. I mentioned automation before, and I think one of the most important things is continuing to train and learn and grow, and then share that knowledge back with your other team members. So okay, so we talked. I have alluded to metrics, right? And one of the key takeaways is like, what are we trying to measure to actually show that we're making progress, both as red and blue teamers and purple teamers. So just one thing to keep in mind when you're talking about metrics reporting is there are data points and there's actual metrics, right? Data points are anecdotal, kind of interesting facts, but they don't provide a whole lot of information in terms of like, what can I do with that information? So metrics actually provide actionable information. What do I need to do? Their focus should be, what is the risk related to the business and the objectives of that engagement? So if you're hired as a pen test team to go in and say, I need to expose the cardholder social security numbers, or credit card numbers, they should be, your focus on what you're going to report from a metrics perspective should be focused on that, as well as metrics internally, like how effective are we accomplishing these tasks and goals. In my opinion, from the director's perspective, I want to know where are our weak points and what is our level of effectiveness in identifying these, as well as maintaining control over these. I personally prefer, the breach and attack life cycle. I do value compliance frameworks, and I think those are good data points as well, or metrics as well. But At the end of the day, we're trying to avoid compromise from a security perspective and identify compromise as early in that life cycle as possible. So being able to tie things back to that, what stage of the life cycle, and how good are we at in each phase of identifying these tactics and techniques is one of the most valuable things that I've found from a true security posture. And then what can I do with this information? So these are the questions that you need to ask. Like, okay, I've provided you some data, but what is this actually telling me? What can I do with this? And this is very important because it's easy to say like you should measure this and you should measure that, but you really have to know your culture and your stakeholders and their approach to decision making. So this is where you build those relationships within the right people to talk to in the organization. If you can't appeal to the culture and provide the metrics that you know are going to help them in their decision-making process, you're not going to get very far, and the metrics are going to be pointless anyways. So on the red team, and I'll kind of try to go fast here. I know we're kind of running out of time. I think it's easy. There's some simple metrics and there's more complex metrics, both for the red team and the blue team. Keeping a log of how often you're touching back with the stakeholders and making those calls or collaboration touch points, not to the excessive amount, but just like here, we're keeping in touch with these folks and letting them know here's the things that we're working on, here's the things that we know you need help in. Year-over-year trends, I think, are important from the red team. They're also important from the blue team, but like, what kinds of things are we identifying as a red team? Are there areas that we feel like as a red team we need to get more training in because we're not finding gaps in these areas, or is there truly gaps that we are missing, right? How many findings have been identified versus resolved? So this kind of comes back to that collaboration piece and the touch points piece, but I mean, it's not one, and you got to be smart about, like, you don't want to just say like, here's how many findings we found, because then whatever you measure against, people are gonna produce, right? So it's not just a matter of like reiterating a bunch of scan results, but providing value in those findings. But I think these are some simple things to get started. And the satisfaction scores, like how happy are the folks that you're doing work with? How happy are they? How happy is your team, right? Are they working on the things that they want to be working on? And then findings by attack category, kind of coming back to those life cycle, the attack life cycle. I think this is very valuable. Like, hey, we're finding a lot of, overall across all of our customers, we're finding attack vulnerabilities in this phase, like say lateral movement or privilege escalation. So being able to have some of those metrics is valuable from the red team's perspective. More complex metrics from the red team, I think engagement effectiveness by type is a good one. Like if we're focused on web apps, what are we finding that's more effective than say our network penetration testing and those kinds of things. So being able to break it down by the different types of assessments and how effective you feel you're being. Operator effectiveness, and I say this with caution, right? It's not a matter of like how good are they at their job. It's a matter of what are they finding so that we can know this is the type of skill set that they really thrive in. These are the type of engagements that they really thrive in, so we can put them on those types of engagements. Or they've expressed they want more training in this area, and we can actually back that up because of how of their reports that they're providing, saying like, what, they're not finding a lot of vulnerabilities in this area, so we're going to get them some more training. Automation effectiveness, we all write scripts and we all do a lot of automation, but do we ever actually come back and measure like how effective are those actually, are those being? Like how often do we use this tool, and does it actually move the needle from a report perspective in terms of finding more vulnerabilities or improving the methodology? So I think always having a mindset towards, we've automated things, how effective is that automation? And then this one truly requires collaboration, but how often did something that we do throw an alert to the SOC where they actually came back to us and said, hey, are you doing something? That's an important metric, but it definitely takes a lot of collaboration and having a lot of infrastructure in place to do that. But I think it's a little more more complex, but it's definitely incredibly valuable. On the blue team side, I mentioned it before, but the mean time to remediation to me is a simple one to get started. So you typically, you may not have exactly when an attack started, but you should, or like, if you're doing, a black box, if you're having a black box penetration test done against you, you may not necessarily know exactly when these attacks kicked off. And you may not even have all the log data to be able to capture that information, but you do know like when that issue actually gets reported. And so you can track like when this was reported to us, and then you can also track when we felt it was resolved. And so being able to say like on average, we're fixing reported known issues within a certain period of time. That's an important first step in actually being able to show your progress on improving your security program. Even like simple trends, like how many issues have been opened and closed each month, and is that rate, continuing to decline in both arenas, right? So as issues get reported, or how long does it take for them to get closed out, and are we starting to close out more than we've opened in each month or time period? I would say these are good data points as well, like the total number of risks and their items and their status in the progress that you're making in fixing those. So a trend of here's how many we have and here's how long it's taking to get these resolved. And that was that's a valuable one that I found for myself. Trainings conducted is important as well. So being able to say like, hey, we've had these touch points with these different teams. Education is incredibly valuable to your organization. So being able to say like we've touched and made this amount of effort into educating the environment or the organization for how to operate more securely. So I think that's an important metric that's fairly simple to keep track of. And then issues coming in from external teams. So like I mentioned early on, there's nothing more rewarding than seeing like somebody in HR or someone in finance reporting things to you, and you should welcome those, even if they may start to get a little, a little heavy on the reporting for things that they should be able to figure out themselves. Don't discourage that, because you always want to keep them coming in and saying, hey, are you guys doing something? Are you phishing me? Those are all good signs, and those are things you can track and start to show like, hey, you can actually show a correlation based on the number of trainings we've conducted, we've seen the issues reported from other teams. And so you can start to draw those correlations, like the more that we train, the more external reports we get and the fewer events that we have, right? And then, risks based on asset criticality. So this is one where you can start to, broadly categorize your different assets into like their criticality level. So is this a server? Is it housing our crown jewels versus a laptop that doesn't get used very often? So being able to differentiate the vulnerabilities and risks associated with those assets. And then even like on thinking from a proactive perspective, how many general assessments did we conduct a month or have conducted against us? Some of the more complex ones that you hear a lot, mean time to detection. This is, to me, a complex thing because you have to have a lot of infrastructure in place to even be able to start measuring this. You have to kind of know when this attack started, right? And have that audit trail and forensic capability to be able to trace back to actually start measuring that. So it's important. I'm not discrediting that, but it can be more complex, and I wouldn't start there. Same with mean time to response may not be as complex, but it's very tied closely to the mean time to detection. So as if you're going to measure the mean time to response once it's been detected or once it's started, so that there's different data points you could capture there. So it can be a little more complex, but it is important. So like as soon as we've been alerted, how long does it take to actually pick that up and run with it? And then it ties easily back into the remediation. Data classification metrics based on, hey, are we able to identify what the most sensitive information is in our environment, and are we able to start identifying how often this might be leaving our network and leaving our environment? It gets to the point of the crown jewels, but it does take some complex, it takes some effort in terms of policy and procedure around classification of your data if you haven't done it already. And so these are things that I think people start to kind of gear towards when they first come out of the gate, building a blue team or building a security program. And those are some of the most to me, they're some of the most complex metrics to try and capture that you're not gonna make a lot of progress, and it's gonna feel a little bit demoralizing. And I'll move quickly because I think I'm running out of time. user permissions metrics, and user behavior. Those are more complex things and things to start keeping on your horizon as you kind of grow your reporting capabilities. All right, real quick, these are things that I would avoid. I tend to avoid overall risk scores, and I know that might be controversial, but I don't know what an overall risk score tells me unless it's my team that's generating it. So if I have a single tool, oftentimes it lacks the context, and I think that you can use it as anecdotal evidence or another data point, but I tend to avoid overall risk scores simply because there are so many opportunities for breach and compromise. You can start to box yourself into a corner if you start saying like, hey, we have 90% of 100, we have a risk score of 900. Like, I don't know what that's telling me. And so this is a personal philosophy. I am fine to debate that, but I tend to avoid just a general risk score of like, you have a risk score of this. Don't tell me about how many attacks were blocked on the firewall. Don't tell me about how many emails were blocked at the email gateway. That's not really that, I mean, that doesn't do anything for me from a security director's perspective. I don't necessarily care about how many users have these different permissions. What I want to know is what our exposure is as a result of that. So if we have 15 domain admins, well, I mean, what is that in relationship to the rest of the organization? Is that appropriate? I don't know. So I need more context with that. And I just use these as I've seen this happen before, and so trying to kind of say like, this would be my opinion as to like what you should avoid. And percent of compliant controls. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry for jumping in here. We're running a little short on time. I want to just see if you just wanted to close it out with your final stuff. Sorry for cutting you off a little short. Just running out of time.
Yep. I think if there's one thing I would just say is continue to train, grow, and teach others along the way. Hopefully that was valuable. I know I kind of had a lot of material there, but appreciate your time. Always feel free to reach out to me, Dan@plextrack.com, or I'm at Wheelhouse on Twitter.